Hello and good afternoon to our in-person audience joining us today, and welcome to those joining virtually from around the world. My name is Ilva Tare. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council. I am delighted to welcome you at this fireside chat event at the Atlantic Council, Commissioner for Transport Adina Vălean, who is also responsible for the EU Solidarity Lanes in Ukraine, among other duties. Commissioner Vălean, a warm welcome at the Atlantic Council. It's a pleasure to have you today. We have a lot to cover on the future of the EU-Ukraine Solidarity Lanes and Europe's transportation industry, all efforts that Commissioner Vălean is leading. This conversation comes at a decisive time for Europe and Europe's transportation infrastructure. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, the rewiring of global supply chains, and the ever-present climate crisis have necessitated essential action in the EU transportation policies. In response to Russia's Black Sea blockades, the solidarity lanes have been critical in the movement of Ukraine's agricultural exports. Improving Europe's connectivity and infrastructure links with Ukraine will be critical, not just from a transportation standpoint, but in economic and social terms as well. Within her scope, Commissioner Vălean is also responsible for implementation of the EU's sustainable and smart mobility strategy, ensuring that Europe's transport sector is fit for the twin digital and green transition. I'm looking forward to discussing ways Europe and the United States can work closer together in developing sustainable and resilient transportation ecosystems. As a quick reminder for those watching virtually, make sure to keep up with the conversation by following us on Twitter at AC Europe. We will have time for audience Q&As later in the session. But first, I would like to start with a question, Commissioner Vălean, on the solidarity lanes. Can you tell us more about this solidarity lanes, starting from the name that you have chosen, and how do they fit into the EU broader support to Ukraine?
Thank you for inviting me here, and it's a pleasure for me to discuss on a very successful initiative Europe has taken into support of Ukraine and Moldova, let's say, in the situation of this horrible war of Russia in Ukraine. It started as solidarity, natural situation, people crossing the border. You have to help. But apart from that, it became, until today, a new form of connectivity of Ukraine and Moldova to Europe and to the world. They are called solidarity lanes because, in fact, they are forms of infrastructure. They started as road, but nowadays we are talking about rail connections, we are talking about inland waterways connections to the Danube, and other forms which are helping nowadays the export and import of Ukraine, because it started with the debate on how the world would receive the so much needed grains produced by Ukraine. But immediately the question was how Ukraine gets the supplies it needs to have its economy still working. So it's a two-way. I said it's a new form of connectivity because nowadays the interlinks and the developments in transport infrastructure between Ukraine and Moldova and the European Union, it looks like an effective integration of these countries into the European Union from this perspective. We have expanded our maps to include Ukraine and Moldova. So our transport European networks now on the maps include Ukraine and Moldova. Adjusted, of course, with the new situation. Yeah. We have liberalized the road transport. Before the war, these countries and any other third country would function in transport operations with Europe based on a permit system, which was not doable in this situation. So what we managed to do is we liberalized the road transport, unprecedented for a third country. I recently signed with Moldova and I will sign with Ukraine an agreement, their accession to our financial instrument, the most important financial instrument for infrastructure. So that means that in the future, they will be able to apply like any other member of the European Union with projects to the funding of their infrastructure at the European budget. So this sounds very de facto as like an integration. So this solidarity lane started as a solidarity gesture. They live their life like a support line for the economy of Ukraine. Yeah. But for the future, they represent an investment to stay. And it represents the new map of connectivity of Europe, of Ukraine and Moldova to the European Union.
Thank you for sharing all this very important information on how it's functioning and how the solidarity lanes are helping. But there are also differences in Ukraine and the EU transport infrastructures slow down the process of cross-border movements of goods. What action is the Commission taking to address these bottlenecks?
Well, let me give you an example. It will be easier to be understood. Ukraine and Moldova have their rail system based on the former Soviet gauge. The width is bigger than the European norm. So imagine that you have convoys of trains trying to cross the border from Ukraine to Romania, different gauge. What you do? You need machineries and whatever to move the grains from one wagon to another, or to move the container from one train to another. This is a serious bottleneck. In time meaning 1 year since we established these solidarity lanes, lots of progress has been done with equipment, but also with infrastructure works in terms of bridges, border crossing points, terminals, multimodal terminals. I've mentioned inland waterways. This is about Danube. The Danube cluster is one of the most important solidarity lane, because it's naturally going to the south through the Danube to the Black Sea or through the port of Constanța. There you have all the bottlenecks, like the number of barges or the pilots to pilot the barges on the river. So a lot of things, but we have overcome them. Most recently, we financed 250 million euros for projects, cross-border projects, especially for this kind of connectivity, Ukraine and Moldova, two frontline countries. And these are going to be topped up to 1 billion by our financial partners for infrastructure projects in Ukraine and Moldova.
So this will ensure the interoperability between Ukraine and the EU transport infrastructure?
Yes, for the moment. In the future, we have finalized a study for the development of a project which I think is going to be a game changer in the region. Rail connection with European gauge from Lvov to Iași, Chișinău, Odessa, so Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, Black Sea ports. This will be really important to have a new European gauge project for rail in these countries.
What role can the transport pillar of the Three Seas initiative play to boost connectivity?
The transport pillar is about connectivity north-south, and this is already reflected in our new proposal, our new maps. It's important, as we can see in the situation, to connect all the frontline countries, Baltics, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, because this connectivity is absolutely needed with the Three Seas, but it's reflected in our maps. So the initiative is, from transport perspective, complementary or coinciding actually with our development plans.
Well, to continue again with the solidarity lanes, how will the European Union maintain the functioning of the EU solidarity lanes in spite of logistical challenges that we mentioned, some concerning the neighboring countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia, where the prices have been driven down and have triggered local protests from farmers in the region, and actually also temporary bans of sanctions on imports?
This has nothing to do with the transport issue itself. So the solidarity lanes were, well, these corridors of transport, well, let's call it this way, solidarity lanes, these were meant to facilitate the transit for the exports and to facilitate the imports. So transit mainly. Of course, they grow to be a connectivity link with also the European market, which became very attractive right now for the products of Ukraine and Moldova, because it's a big market, it's close to. What happened with the prices of the grains is that traders from Europe bought these products. It's not that the products were dumped there because the corridors are not working. So they entered the market. And then on a market, of course, you have a game of price. Sometimes goes up, sometimes
Supply,
goes down.
demand.
What we have seen, I'm not an expert in agriculture topic, but what the analysis I have seen is that the prices went down, especially because Russia sold under the price, flooded the market. The prices went down, so that those reserves of grains in some countries, traders bought them, hoping to have a profit, which is still weighted. But if they are not sold, of course, they congest the storage capacity. So it's a market issue, and in time it will be solved. It's something new for us.
Yeah.
And,
but so far it hasn't affected the solidarity lanes.
No, the solidarity lanes are even improving and working very well. We just move products. We don't decide where the products are going. So we do not decide that the grain from Ukraine will go to Poland. No, we say if the grains from Ukraine needs to go to Poland, the corridor is working. But maybe through Poland they go to Netherlands, as it's a case, for example. Traders in Rotterdam are interested in trade grains from Ukraine, so you have trains going from Ukraine through Poland to Netherlands. So it's not necessarily the frontline countries to be the destination of these products.
So moving on to a different but connected subject, what challenges has the European transport industry faced in the light of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and rising energy prices? At the EU level, what investments are being considered to help ease these economic shocks?
Well, there were several shocks. The war is one of them. The energy prices another. We had before that COVID. So a lot of shocks for the transport industry everywhere in the world, in Europe in particular. To give you just an example, nowadays, summer is coming, a lot of people want to travel. We will have congestion because we cannot use full capacity of our airspace. Our companies, the connection towards Asia, they have to take a detour. Because not being able to fly over the war zone or as a sanction over the Russian airspace. So a lot of things are affecting. In energy, we didn't see it in the end something, a problem to stay. So we were a bit worried at the beginning for the rail sector with the price of electricity, which were soaring. But it didn't last. So I would say from energy point of view, the challenge is more how we can increase the volumes of sustainable alternative fuels, how to electrify better and faster in order to tackle the sustainability pledge we have as a transport industry.
What can be more done in terms of from the member state level?
From the member states?
Yeah.
The member states have a lot of money right now. And what can be done more from the member states part is to step up the transition and the investments. I'm saying they have more money now because Europe developed as a response to various crises instruments of financing, unprecedented. If I look only at the recent next generation funds, which are plans for recovery and resilience. They have a very good percentage in infrastructure transport projects. So the money are there to be taken and to be invested, because any investment in transport, it's an investment in the growth of the economy.
So the money are in Brussels, are not in the member states yet?
No, they are. Well, some are there, some are...
But they have to make sure that they get these funds in order to,
no,
to prepare
it
for
is
the
decided.
transition.
It is decided for every country. The country decided what projects they want to do. And then it was decided among them how much money they'll get for that. And now it's the process ongoing. Some money were already directed towards the member states based on the level of development of the project. Others are in waiting.
Yeah.
They're not going all at the same time.
Commissioner Vălean, what is on the agenda of the EU sustainable and smart mobility strategy? What are the main priorities for the green transition in the transport sector that you cover?
So the purpose is to cut the emissions. You know that Europe has a pledge to become
Fit for 55 targets?
Apart from that, to become neutral by 2050. This is an intermediate target, Fit for 55. That means for transport to reduce with 90% the emissions by 2050. And then you make a calculation backwards, and then you say what you need to do to achieve this. The conclusion was that all the sectors have to contribute to this reduction, from aviation to inland waterways and maritime. For each sector, there is a basket of measures. We do not have a silver bullet, but many projects to decarbonize. And what is most important is to make a multimodal shift, meaning to shift the transport of goods, for example, from road, which is more emitting, towards rail, for example, which is one of the most sustainable in terms of emissions.
And what are the priorities for transatlantic cooperation in the global transport economy and the supply chain ecosystem?
The partnership is very important, transatlantic, because in modes of transportation, as aviation or maritime, which are global, we are natural allies because we have ambition. We are huge markets, and we have to stick together to obtain more sustainability, but also more profitability. So we are interested parties, and you could have seen that, for example, when we acted together and convinced others to follow in ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, where we needed to make a commitment for the whole world to get a target of reduction of emissions in aviation, to implement, so this type of cooperation in international organization is very natural and important. Apart from that, it's very important that together we'll be able to develop standards which will help our industries to go in the same direction and save money, because if we can impose a common standard, European, American, for, electric vehicles or something, this becomes more competitive with other parts of the world. So these are a couple of examples. Of course, we cooperate a lot in aviation, that's natural, but also we exchange on what it means development of global infrastructure. It was announced. We'll have to see how we advance in this one. But I think a common thinking on what type of supply chains and the global corridors needs to be developed to be safe, sustainable, and not or difficult to disrupt. this is something we should do together.
Mm-hmm. And from the meetings you had here in Washington, D.C., if you can tell us, can share with us your evaluation, your perspective on how prepared is Europe and the United States to deploy alternative fuel infrastructure, including recharging and refueling stations?
Well, I think both of us, we are very ambitious. The way we approach things might differ. It's important to recognize each other's efforts and go in the same direction. For example, we approach the development of the market of sustainable alternative fuels for aviation, trying to increase the demand, create a market for the production of these fuels by saying that there is an obligation of blending, which is growing over the time, for aircraft to take blended fuel with sustainable alternative fuels. Here it's incentivize the production of sustainable alternative fuels. So these are things in which we should go work together and go in the same direction.
One more question from me, and then we'll turn to our audience, virtual audience, and in person for questions, Madam Commissioner. Though much of the focus of the IRA, the Reduction Act industrial policy impact in Europe has been on the potential negative effects on the European industry. Could you discuss the potential for cooperation with the US on green transportation infrastructure?
Yes, I was giving you this example of sustainable alternative fuels. And the previous the example on standards, for example. If we develop a common standard for electric trucks, for example, now the Trade and Technology Council is working on such a common standard for a megawatt charger. This would be beneficial for the industry and the economy and the development of sustainable transport vehicles like electric trucks on both sides of the Atlantic. So this is a concrete thing we are working on. I mentioned the alternative fuels. We approach it differently, but we want the same thing. There is a huge potential in everything we do. If we look at maritime, for example, and developing new fuels for greening or reducing the intensity of maritime operations, the intensity of the emissions of maritime operations. All these are common interest.
I have more questions, but I want the audience, since we promised them we're going to take their questions,
yes,
so they can have a chance to ask you, Commissioner Vălean. We'll start with the question. It's virtually from Andrew Danieri from Eurasia Center. Andrew?
Thanks, Silva, and thank you, Madam Commissioner, for joining us at the Atlantic Council. I'm Andrew Danieri. I work at the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, and we focus primarily on Ukraine. So I want to ask you again about Danube connectivity. And Ukrainian companies in support with support from USAID are focusing on expanding capacity on their kind of portion of the Danube River there for shipping grain and other products as well, and are also looking into plans for a new railroad coming up across the Danube north through Odessa. And so I was wondering kind of how the EU plans to help support these increases in capacity, both in rail and in shipping in the Danube.
Yep.
Thank you. Well,
thank you.
Through all the means we have, these projects of connectivity are primarily between the frontline member states. In the case of Danube, we have Romania, but we have interested party also Moldova there. And I was saying that these projects are mainly between Ukraine, Moldova, and frontline countries. So what is important for us is these projects to be agreed and to know exactly what it is to be done. And a very good cooperation across the border, it's very important for the rapidity. Romania did a lot, for example, from its own money from structural funds, from cohesion funds, already put some of its money to develop projects to improve the connectivity there. And this cluster, I said, is very important because it's Danube, but it's also through Danube the access to the Black Sea. So USAID, it will be very helpful if they would continue to support common projects. So it has to be together with both parties cross-border to make sure that these are on a list of priorities and the best ones to make a difference.
Unless Andrew has a follow-up and we still have him, I'll continue with another question. Andrew? I'm not sure he's still...
Go ahead without me.
Okay, thank you. I will continue with another question that we have from our audience, and please, if we have a question from the in-person audience, we will definitely get it in a second. Commissioner, one area of the US-EU, says one of the questions, has been overinvestment in infrastructure to facilitate the green transition. However, as the US aims to ramp up its transportation infrastructure, EU companies and Transatlantic cooperation could assist the US in upgrading train cars, for example. Do you see this as a potential area of cooperation, and how do you think that should be accomplished?
To upgrade the trains and cars in US by the European companies,
Yeah.
That's the question. Well, it should go both ways, because I'm absolutely sure there are companies, and I encourage them to contribute to innovation and improvement of rail overall in Europe, and the other way around probably, because, for example, an investment we are focusing in Europe is on digitalization of the management on rail, because we are trying to make it work, the interoperability and the connectivity across border in Europe itself. But for this, we have inherited different systems, and these have to talk to each other. And we are trying to deploy a lot of technology and innovation to reduce the costs and implement these systems so that the management on rail goes smoothly. We are working in Europe with so-called joint undertakings, which are companies, and everyone is invited to contribute, who are looking on topics which needs to be fixed, and they go together around that topic, and being able to develop through research a solution to solve the problem. But this is, from technology point of view, absolutely a door open for the US, and I'm absolutely sure that this kind of innovation can be used on both sides of the Atlantic. Well, the height of the train, it's yet different, so I'm just saying.
One element.
One element.
Our senior fellow, Fran Burrell. Fran, you have a question? I think you have a microphone. It's coming. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Commissioner, for joining us here today. I wondered if you could speak specifically about the role of hydrogen in the transition in transport. How do you expect that to evolve, given, it would be a huge task to put refueling stations every 250 kilometers or whatever it is, but how do you expect this to evolve in terms of maritime, aviation, road, and what support is the EU providing specifically for hydrogen and as a subcategory green hydrogen? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We are trying to remain open to the developments of the market. So that's why a lot of movement and projects were developed and interest around hydrogen. And the challenge we have right now is to find the right thing for right mode. This is a challenging situation. What is best to be used where? Because it's a scarce resource. And hydrogen, of course, can be used with many things. We have developments of trucks fueled by hydrogen. We have technologies for maritime, depending on operation, where hydrogen can be easily used. We have had some announcements, maybe less strong now, also for aviation, but I would let aviation a bit aside for hydrogen. So it is road. Then we have trains on hydrogen in Europe. So it's a bit everywhere. Is going to be enough hydrogen there for everything? This is a question. Then how much it will cost, and then how green it will be. So that's why I would say we remain open towards hydrogen, but the market and the natural evolution of sectors will tell us where is more needed and where it makes more sense.
We have another question from our Director of 3Cs Initiatives, Ian Brzezinski, here in person. Thank you, Ian.
Commissioner,
Hi.
thank you for your time. Hello, welcome to Washington. You know, Bucharest is going to be hosting the next 3C Summit this coming September. From your vantage point, what would you like to see the 3Cs do in the realm of transportation? What would you like to see the 3Cs initiative do in supporting Ukraine's integration into the wider European market space in the realm of integration?
So as I said, I think we are very much, from transport point of view, I know it's more than transport, the initiative, and it's very actual. We can see that it was needed, and we should have acted probably with more speed, but the conflict now in the area makes the initiative even more actual. And I said from transport point of view, we have looked at what the initiative wants, the connection of the 3Cs, and we put it on the map, the connectivities. But this has many of them to be built yet. So there is a huge need of investment in infrastructure overall in Europe, in the world, and in future for reconstruction in Ukraine. So this is what it has to be need. We have to talk about this and to mobilize funds and companies to participate to this construction/reconstruction for the future. I know this September is going to be. I was aware, and I'm following it with very much interest.
Commissioner Vălean, thank you very much for joining us here at Atlantic Council and discussing these crucial issues while we have a critical war in Ukraine, hoping that things will improve soon, and your solidarity lanes are helping the population there and Europe's transportation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, the in-person audience and our audience virtually. Thank you for joining us.